Right now from the Washington Examiner on Twitter at Secrets Bedard. Paul Bedard is with us. Paul, how are you, sir?
Hey, great day. How you doing?
I am fantastic. I appreciate you coming on the program, and really glad to see you writing about this Pew survey on gun ownership. It's kind of interesting. You know, I always say I take every poll with some grains of salt. I don't know that any poll is a perfect snapshot, and I've got some questions about some of the numbers and figures in this Pew survey, but generally speaking, I still think that you can learn things from a poll, even if the numbers are not going to be absolutely 100% on the dot accurate. You say some of the key findings in this survey: 7 in 10 adult Americans say that they have fired a gun. At least 2/3 have lived in a household with a gun. 3 in 10, according to this survey, say that they own a gun. Another 11% say they currently live in a home with someone who owns a gun. And only about 1/3 of Americans say they don't own a gun and they don't want one.
I thought the survey was pretty interesting in that, you know, it showed that the country has a real familiarity with guns, and that's kind of a Pew's conclusion, too. And, you know, you don't get that. I mean, I live inside the Washington bubble, so you don't really get that feeling that people, you know, in urban areas get that. You know, a lot of the country is very familiar with guns, with gun ownership. Half of them say that they grew up in families that had guns, and that kind of jives with a lot of figures back in the 70s and 80s that, you know, half homes had them. And you know, Cam, it also looked at kind of some of the, I guess, the more controversial issues with ownership. And there, Pew also found that there is some agreement with gun owners and non-gun owners, especially on issues like gun safety and teaching safety to their kids. And even on, you know, kind of gun control-ish issues like, you know, everyone agrees there should be a background check and agrees that those who have mental issues shouldn't have access to them. So it's about 100 questions or so to almost 4,000 people.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, you know, some of that, when they get into the specifics, Paul, I'm always curious, like, because, you know, again, it's very easy to offer up a one-sentence, do you like this? You actually start looking at the legislation. And you look at, okay, well, how do you want to accomplish this? That never gets asked, right? So I thought it was interesting that, and two, you can kind of slice and dice this. So there's a headline out, I think, in Politico right now, 52% of Americans say they support more gun control. But if you look at this Pew survey, 55% of Americans say when it comes to the NRA, they have either the right amount of influence or they should have more political influence. And only 44% say the NRA has too much influence. So I think, you know, again, with these 100 questions, maybe in some cases we're able to also spot some inconsistencies in the American position.
Oh, sure. And you know, reporters, I mean, we love these polls because you can you can pick whatever angle you want, and two stories seem totally opposite. Actually, they're in agreement because you can kind of cherry pick your numbers on this. But you know, there were a bunch of highlights, and one of them I thought really stood out was 61% of the country have a positive view of gun owners. That's a figure you never hear about.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they believe that, you know, generally people who own a weapon are trained or have gone through some sort of explanatory class and know what they're doing. And it's a kind of refreshing view, I think, of how the country looks at us.
I agree with that. And I think that stat, you and I had kind of talked about this on Twitter a little bit earlier. 1 in 5 gun owners say they belong to the NRA. Now, I wish that were the case.
Yeah.
But as you pointed out, Paul, 1 in 5 gun owners, according to the survey, which would be between 15 and 20 million Americans, they say they belong to the NRA. They may very well think that they belong to the NRA, and certainly that would indicate that they're allied with the NRA. That these are other Americans who are on board with the NRA's message and the NRA's mission, and that is. You're talking about 20 million Americans. Paul, that's a huge number of Americans involved and engaged on a political issue, particularly on one side of a political issue.
You know, when I do stories about NRA positions and those who belong and those who don't, the NRA always says, listen, you know, we have 5 to 8 million members depending on the time of year, but a lot of people think just by virtue of buying a weapon, they feel like they get ownership or they get membership in, and the numbers the NRA typically puts out are about what Pew found. Mm-hmm. About 20 million people think they belong to the NRA, which gives the organization tremendous extra power when it goes into lobbying, when it goes into talk about issues, and also when it promotes, you know, issues like safety. Like, for example, today, you know, Chris Cox of ILA has said, listen, to the House and Senate, you know, we're going to offer you some training if you'd like to come in.
Yep.
As a result of Senator's question dealing with the baseball shooting, and I think that, you know, that's a good thing, and that shows also the influence of the organization.
Absolutely, and I hope members of Congress, both sides of the aisle, take advantage of that offer and that opportunity. And you know, it's a fascinating survey, Paul. One of the other things that I thought was interesting: 67% of gun owners, you say, note that self-defense, that's the primary reason they own a gun. 38% say hunting, 30% sport shooting. If you're doing your math, it adds up to more than 100%. You could pick more than one answer, but very clearly. You know, we hear all the time, well, you don't need X, Y, or Z for hunting. Okay, you might not. But there are a lot of Americans who are gun owners, not because they're hunters, but because they want to protect themselves and the people that they love.
Listen, a lot of gun stores have told me they've seen a spike in the past couple of years due to terrorism, due to just general threats they see in the newspapers and on TV. There's been a spike in especially buying pistols. And this is not just, you know, the usual white guy crowd. A ton of women are getting involved. A lot of minorities, especially African Americans, are buying these guns. And the reason is for self-protection. Yeah, they go to the range. About 30% say they like to do that. 30% say they like to hunt. But generally, it's self-protection. And that has also, of course, sparked, you know, the concealed carry movement. And in Congress, it looks like they almost have enough votes, certainly in the House, to push through the concealed carry reciprocity law.
I think we're over 200 sponsors now on concealed carry reciprocity. And, you know, concealed carry, they didn't ask specifically about concealed carry, but this Pew survey noted, I think, 26% of gun owners, they said, responded that they are usually carrying a firearm for self-defense. That number went up to 41% of gun owners who live in neighborhoods that they feel are unsafe. And I wish that they had asked a 101st question, Paul, because I would have loved to have known, among the gun owners in particular, are you able to legally carry, even if you live, right? I mean, because we know that there are huge population centers like New York City, Washington, D.C., coastal California, Maryland, you're not going to be able to, New Jersey, you're not going to be able to get a concealed carry license. So I want to know, and I would love to know how many of those gun owners would like to be able to carry but can't because of the laws of the state that they live in.
Yeah, I suspect that'll be a follow-up because that's kind of what Pew does. In fact, they might have asked it, and then we're going to get that in a month. But I think that's a good question. And they did ask, okay, for gun owners, do you have one close at hand? Is it loaded? Are you ready to go if something is ready to happen? And 38% said yes, they are ready.
That's, you know, and that doesn't surprise me either because I think, again, over the past few years, the number of new gun owners coming in, they're not interested in just buying a gun and putting it up on a shelf somewhere. Like, they want to get trained. They want to go to the range. They're very much thinking about this. And this was not I don't think for many of these folks, this was a quick decision. I think a lot of folks have thought about this for some time. So the fact that, you know, if they're carrying a firearm or if they have a firearm for self-defense, the fact that it's ready to be used in case they need it, that doesn't surprise me at all. What about you?
Well, no, not at all. I mean, I live in Northern Virginia, and I belong to a couple of shooting clubs like Isaac Walton, and we've seen a spike in the number of people who were going there, who were training, who were taking classes. There's a really nice range here, Silver Eagle, and you have to wait in line to go through their concealed carry classes. So people are very tuned in, and a lot of it is due to, you know, somewhat the terrorism that they see around the world, but you know, the other things like the baseball shooting or what happened up in up north with that terrorist attack. They're just much more aware of their surroundings.
Absolutely, absolutely. Paul, listen, I appreciate you coming on the program, sir. We'll have to do an interview out at the NRA range one day. Would you do that with us?
I'm there.
All right, man. We'll make that happen at some point in the very near future. Always good talking with you, Paul.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Paul Bedard at Secrets Bedard on Twitter, WashingtonExaminer.com.